René Repasi, very warm welcome to Digital Markets Research Hub. You are a politician, but you also been academic for quite a long time, dealing with the issues which we try to examine within this narrow focused research cluster, namely digital markets and EU law. So I wanted to use this rare opportunity to focus on both, to look at the technical issues of DMA and the issue of competition in digital markets, the role of Europe in this global digital race, but also the interaction with other mechanisms, which we, because so much is going on, rarely have an opportunity to examine in detail. So we need a broader picture as well. So I wanted to start maybe with asking you to offer your vision about the historical moment which we find ourselves these days, in the context of digital mainly, of course. What's the role of Europe? What do we do? Do we do things right, etc.?
Yes, no, thanks for the invitation to be part in our conversation here. It's an honor to have that conversation. And so where do we stand? The issue of the digital markets is, of course, not a totally new development. We have seen in the past quite some attempts by the European Commission, in particular DG Competition, in order to act on the basis of competition law against what they saw in digital markets in a very timid way, at times even reinforcing certain tendencies on digital markets. I just made reference to the old case on the WhatsApp Facebook merger. And we saw that this is not a tool that is properly working. So therefore, we have now in this mandate that started in 2019 is going to end in a couple of weeks, made it a crucial point to somewhat empower competition authorities, the European Commission and other authorities with more tools to actually act. Now, if we look at the digital markets, then we have a situation where I would even conclude these are not markets. So we call them markets, but they don't work accordingly, since they are very weird in their structure. If we compare them to, let's say, real life markets, we have dominant undertakings that basically behave like the oil industry 100 years ago in the United States. And accordingly, we must act. And we saw that competition tools were, at least in the European Union, not fit for purpose. So we had to come to a kind of change of paradigm, that we analyze these digital markets not according to the standard EU competition law lens. That is, we don't really care about the market structure, but only if the market structure is producing abusive results, or if in the market structure we have a coordinated action that undermines the well-functioning of these kind of markets. Now, digital markets just don't play according to these rules. And therefore, what we did in digital markets is championing a new way of how we have to see markets more generally, that this is about power and structure and not about abuses of power and abuses of structure. And the DMA in particular gave here additional tools to the European Commission, but we also tried it with good old kind of regulation, looking at the Digital Service Act and other fields that are around this area. So that's basically where we stand. The challenge for Europe is twofold. The one thing is restoring a proper functioning of digital markets, but that is basically aiming at companies not being established in the European Union, but most of them in the United States, one of them at least also in China. And the other one is to come to a situation that the next innovator, the next big competitor, and the destructive challenger is a European one. So we have also to create the foundations for a proper digital challenger to those that are already on the market.
Okay, this is very important turning point, I think, because many people allude to this trajectory of the development, but not many are brave enough to manifest this explicitly, that this is one of the challenges, or one of the historical opportunities as well, and necessities probably even, to start thinking maybe about EU big tech, or increased role of European polity in this global digital constellation, because we started with huge handicap. We were up front of all these processes, but now we see how rapidly it is melting, and we, or you politicians, have to think strategically ahead, etc. Now, obviously, we sense or understand that it's, however toxic it was considered in competition law corners of this field, we still understand that it's getting more and more relevant. But the question is how? Do you think that we have this critical mass of vision or different, do we have to have consensual vision, how detailed this vision should be, or it's just trial and errors and we do things when they emerge? What's the strategy?
Now, what we are actually still facing is, if I may be so blunt, it is a battle of visions. We have the good old, let's call it 1980s style competition vision that is dominant here in Brussels. And we have a contestation of that vision led by some national competition authorities. I make reference to the German competition authority, I make reference to the Dutch competition authority, and also then coming from the European Parliament. So the issue here is now we have created some laws that give the competition authorities and the European Commission additional tools, but will they actually use it? Since that is particularly referring to the issue of the vision. When you have a vision that privacy concerns are no competition concerns, when you have a vision that other general interest objectives are to be defended by special regulation, but not by competition, which has a very narrow view on competitive goals, that is just lower prices and more and better products. From that moment on, yeah, we can create as many tools as we want to, but those that take up those tools will just not use it in the way that we intend them to be used. Hence, it is absolutely about the vision. But we do see that within the European Parliament, there's even a cross-party coalition forming of those who see competition, at least in digital markets, to have to follow a different vision. And in that sense, to look more at power and that structure. But we see this also in competition authorities. As I said, if we look at the fight of the German cartel authority against Facebook, if we see the initiatives by the German Ministry of Economy to reform the German national cartel law in order to give also the German cartel office additional tools at hand, we see those visions emerging. And probably after the European elections, when there's going to be a new competition for commission to be chosen, we are going to have a crunch time. Margrethe Vestager is not the kind of person that has this new vision, as I would call it. She is more a traditionalist in that sense. But when she's going to stop as a commissioner, we're going to get a new commissioner. And this question of the vision on how competition should act and the European Commission should act in digital markets is going to be one of the core elements in selecting the new commissioner.
I asked, or I mentioned that you are an academic dealing with EU law, and it's forever. We understand that you temporarily out of this modality of thinking, but you are very familiar with continuous, particularly in EU law. So much is going on that we are very busy within our narrow field. But now in the Parliament, in the European Parliament, you've been participating in the legislative process in all three largest, most influential committees: Committee for the Internal Market and Consumer Protection, Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee, and for Legal Affairs Committee. These three were, at least in the DMA, were the leading authorities and agenda setters. So I wanted to ask you how about the kitchen of the DMA legislation. Did you notice different not visions maybe, but what I noticed while monitoring the process, that some amendments were motivated by good intentions, but they would completely disarm the very logic of functioning of the DMA, like mandatory minimum fines, which would make it less flexible. Many examples. So what did you manage to create the final product, the Digital Markets Act, being the best out of all possible alternatives? Did you have in mind something slightly different? Maybe we missed something. What is your view about the final product of the DMA?
Now, on the DMA, it is basically that I started only in the second half of the match, since I only became an MEP in February 2022. At that moment of time, the parliamentary phase was already concluded, when my predecessor, Evelyn Gebhardt, was the SMD's shadow rapporteur on the DMA. So I can, from my own experience, only comment on the second phase, which were the trialogue negotiations with Council and Commission. Probably the more relevant ones, since there the final deal was forged. But that is basically, as a preliminary remark, the only experiences I can draw myself on. Now, is it the best that we can get? Look, it all depends on your analytical framework and the benchmark that you're including into it. Now, that's academics talk, but still, I think relevant. If you have a certain ideal vision of how digital markets should look like and which role public authorities should play and which role extra competitive goals should play and which tools competition authorities should have at their disposal, from that point of view, you can say, well, there are still quite some shortcomings in the DMA. If your benchmark is including the variable of reality and policy making, you need to get a majority done. And is within the framework of majorities, be they in parliament, be they in the council, bringing it together. So within the limitations that majority forging makes, which means you have to make compromise between different kind of visions that are out there. Then you can always come to it is always less than the ideal world. And that means, are we as close as possible to the ideal world, or how far away from the ideal world? And here I would still say that in particular, the DMA reached quite a high point close to a good ideal world in terms of lawmaking. Yes, compromises had to be made. Yes, that makes some strange wording in articles, but guys, there's still something to be done for academics anyway. So let's sort some strange wording out, and I'm always open to give some insights what the negotiators might have thought with this particular kind of wording. But I think that within this overall framework, we came out with quite a good result.
But DMA is only one player in the squad. We have really cascade of EU legislation dealing with very similar, if not identical, challenges or opportunities, namely restoring or reinforcing competition in digital markets and competitiveness of European digital markets. Let's put it in more neutral way. What is your compass? Can you assist us to navigate through this labyrinth of AI Act, DSA? I remember when this process started, we were talking DMA/DSA as if almost one or twin regulation. Now we forgot about DSA because so much is going on within DMA, but we need contextualization. Can you provide us your vision about this correlation between different pieces of EU law?
Yeah, sure. I mean, all these acts are following different kind of objectives, different kind of purposes. Hence, they are next to each other. What you described is particularly this kind of fast track policy making here in Brussels, that me coming from my old academic world, where you think 5 years about something and write something where everybody here has already forgotten everything about this particular point. But that's fine. Legal practice later will pick it up, and a new debate will start once the European Court of Justice has rendered some revolutionary judgment, and we will repeat this kind of discussion. So that's just the nature of things. Huh? But if we then look indeed at the bigger picture. Now, the DMA was meant in order to address gatekeepers, and in particular, those outside of the European Union. So therefore, the regulatory model behind it was a very different one to the DSA, which was aiming at those digital market operators that are also in Europe. And the perspective then changes. Given that you look at the digital market that is non-functional, you needed a DMA in order to give additional tools to the European Commission to make it more functional. At the same time, you look at those that are on the market, but even if they are small and do not really add to the functioning of the digital markets, can have impact. It can still have an impact on consumers' well-being, on consumers' behavior, but at the same time must make a trade-off that certain things are not over-regulated, so that the next innovator cannot even come to innovation because they are just completely worn out by all compliances that they have to do with various legal acts. Therefore, the DSA is a different kind of balancing than we have it in the DMA. And then we have the AI Act, if you put it next to it, which is one particular kind of technology that obviously has a disruptive a disruptive nature and therefore is to be looked at. And here the question comes, okay, do we still want to have it unregulated and see where we are heading to, or do we want to act? We have experience with new technologies from the past, where it was always the question is, it always starts at the same. Let's first give it a development. Then there must be a self-assessment. Now, economic operators, private operators, by definition, pursue private interests and economic interests. That is absolutely fine, but don't be mistaken. If by chance they're also following a public interest, then it's by chance because there's overlap. But that is not a regulatory model. So we see from the research clearly that self-assessment and self-regulation doesn't work. So therefore, the next step is we have to do standard setting, and that's what the AI Act does. It basically jumps over the first two periods and already gets into the third one, which makes for the legislator quite a challenging task, since we are used to already have a market development until the third step before we go into regulation. So we know what things went wrong and how do we legislate properly. Now we had to make a legislation without experience on how this market works. Therefore, it embodies the risk of, again, over-regulation. I do think that we found a good balance in this. It is a balance that will keep academia and legal practice quite busy in the years to come. It might make it necessary that the legislator has to change things, because we are here working really also in legislative terms in uncharted territories. And we must therefore also be willing to amend in order to adopt accordingly. So that's therefore a very different one. And then we have this big ecosystem of further data regulation. We have the Data Act. It's a question of who gets access to data, given that data at times is, not at times, it is actually the core element of doing business in digital markets. So if we as citizens, data is actually our thing. Now, how much can we actually dispose of our data? What are those doing that have access to it? And how much does it have to be shared in order then build up new infrastructure? Because a new contender might have a brilliant idea, but just not sufficient data. And that makes it that one can never grow, because those that hold the data do not share it. So giving data access is necessary in order to help new competitors to actually grow and come to some sort of level playing field, so that ultimately it's the quality of the business idea that matters, and not whether you had 10 years of advancement in order with regard to data collection. And that brings us then to setting the ground for new European competitors to grow. Now we are now in the phase of looking at the overall, let's say, physical infrastructure. So Thierry Breton is preparing the Data Network Act, where the question is now, what do telecommunications companies, and what is their role there, and how are they financed? So looking at the physical infrastructure. So that was maybe a bit longer answer, but since you asked about the ecosystem, we have several acts, but they have several purposes, and they all together give this picture, or make this picture that I was referring to in the beginning. We want to have fairer and more functioning digital markets, in which then a new contender could actually grow, so that also European competitors might play a role in the future.
The answer was not long at all. It was very detailed, very informative. Thank you very much, René, for this. I wanted to follow on, if possible, on the trend which many observe, that it can be captured with the phrase Brussels effect, that there are three digital empires, and the DNA of European digital empires being kind of standard, human-centered, standard setter, global, ethical milestone. So I wonder, when we talk about EU digital industrial policy, should we keep following exclusively this modality of just being, for example, when we talk about this data infrastructure, open source philosophy and ideology emerges immediately, and we hear people talking that that's the way, that's our selling point, so to say. Do you think that we should adhere exclusively to this ethos of digital romanticism, or we have to be more pragmatic and cynical and try to follow the pathway which have been developed by two other global trendsetters?
Look, let's take as a starting point for the answer the reference that you made to the Brussels effect. I believe this is a notion that is highly overestimated. and is more of a so you have to, it's not just because Europe is setting any standards that the world is following Europe. It's not that simple. Where the Brussels effect, let's say that the core interest of the Brussels effect to work, or the core way of how it works, is that all economic operator and the products want to enter the internal market. So by entering into the internal market, products have to comply with our product standards. And since it's more costly to have two ways of producing a product, you just do it once, and that is according to the EU standards, and then you can sell everywhere. I mean, that is the basic idea. Only this works if there is if the internal market is a center of gravity that is attracting economic operators and products to get there. While this is kind of clear for physical products, because we have consumers with high incomes, so there is much benefit to be made if you sell your physical products on the European internal market. I believe this is different when we look at digital products or at products that were not yet developed. So the reason why the Brussels effect works as a second is, in my eyes, because there is already existing European production. Since if there is no existing European production, then third country economic operators can always tell the European Union, your consumers are in high demand of my product, maybe even addicted to my product, and I will cut off access to my products if you do not make the standards as I want them. And this is an argument that flies if Europe cannot say, okay, whatever, then you're out. I have a competing European product, which is maybe different, but serves the need more or less equally as your product. And from that moment on, all this threatening is not going to work, and we have operators bowing to the European norms. So therefore, the Brussels effect in products that are not yet designed, or in digital markets where the market dominance is definitely outside of Europe, it requires that we have functioning European products that can serve as a substitute for any third country product that simply doesn't abide by the European norms, by the Brussels effect. So therefore, whatever we do in terms of Brussels effect in digital market, it requires at the same time that we empower the internal market and market operators in Europe to actually build up, create this new product or this new digital product that is in demand by our citizens and that is developed under European standards to be competitive on the European internal market. From that moment on, we are going to also export our norms, because then the competition logic requires that external operators will also produce their products in accordance with European norms.
Okay, let me continue with this thought experiment maybe. And we know that big tech has this remarkable ability to adopt to all the rules as long as the rules are clear. That's probably one of the reasons why the DMA has this susceptibility of being further specified, i.e. you keep this opacity by design, and this is not back, it's a feature of equalizing the asymmetry of information and competence. But what we somehow see or hear the continuous message, tell us what to do. We are happy to be quasi-public utilities. We learned our lessons of the past. You want good job. You want to become more Europe-centered. We are happy to integrate, to share some of our facilities, or maybe to relocate our facilities to Europe. Latest mergers in AI sector allude to this trajectory, so to say. Would we be happy with this kind of attempt to making current big tech more Euro-centered, or it's only a second or third best solution?
In my eyes, it's a second or third best solution. It's good that this is happening, but honestly, we shall not be naive. I come back to the initial starting point. These companies are companies, and they pursue their company interest, however that is defined, be it shareholder value, be it whatever else, but it is a private interest. A private actor saying, I'm now pursuing public interests which are not in line with my private interests, is something that I have difficulties to imagine, or at best, or at least I find it a bit naive from a regulator's perspective to stop my activities just because I hear this kind of promise. I think we have enough evidence from the past that this is not the case.
And last question on this block. If we keep this taxonomy of three digital empires, so three approaches to things, do you think we have to be more, what is our European way? Should we learn from the West and from the East? Should we learn only from the West? Should we try to develop our own business model, how to scale up?
No, yeah, of course, let's say, look, we are here on this European continent, but we are still basically part of one human race. And we work by learning from each other, irrespective who has produced what kind of knowledge. The best way of knowledge production is that everybody has access to any kind of knowledge that was ever created by a human being until today. This is the ideal world. So in that sense, of course, we must learn from the West as we must learn from the East. But our main objective is learning is not a process in itself. It should produce new insights, new knowledge. It should therefore create also from a European perspective, if we want to go one step further in terms of what happens on markets, it should enable a new European researcher, a European company alliance, whatever, with coming up with something new that maybe is a disruptive innovation. So Europe should be the place for disruptive innovation again. If we go back like 150 years, then it was Germany in which the cars were invented, in which many other products were invented for the first time. It was the country of the engineers and the inventors creating those companies from which Germany's welfare is now drawing on, but they were ultimately in the beginning innovations that disrupted markets, and they were made here in Germany and in Europe. Now this is somewhere else, this is differently. And that is what I want to reflect on, how we can create an environment in which we can learn from the best, but develop it in our own European way.
Let us move a little bit to the institutional setting and talking about competition policy. As you know, we've been driven in the past, in not very recent past, by the motto of more economic approach inspired by Chicago School. And one of many implications is that the belief or almost the dream of having competition authority being as neutral, as independent from the broader governmental agenda as possible, because we were hoping to find this kind of encyclopedic solution in mathematics and in price theory. So we were positioned ourselves as neutral, positioning ourselves, whereas broader societal interest is always elements of commensurability. We were hoping to find everything commensurable. Now the pendulum is swinging to the opposite direction, saying that all broader society, or many or some societal values have to be included. Trying to recalibrate the relationship between the competition authorities and the broader government within member states or Europe. I know that Commission is one body, but still, how would you propose? What would be your algorithm?
My algorithm. You ask a lawyer to write an algorithm. I can write a legal text, but not an algorithm. Only some logic might actually also be comparable in both. But coming to the question, honestly, I believe the more economic approach was always, at best, a dream, but something that was doomed not to work. We've seen, particularly in the United States, that with the start of the Biden administration, that although he is an old guy, what's happening in terms of consumer protection and competition is hyper innovative. And they were, whilst the other side of the Atlantic was sleeping for decades, with the start of the Biden administration, they woke up and speed up in making markets work better, but with a very public perspective, whilst we are still a bit back down in the 1990s. For me personally, the thing is, but I might have a bias given that I'm a lawyer here, I always had some difficulties that we write laws, but then apply them in an economic manner, which enables lawyers to actually apply the rules. So lawyers write the rules, but economists have to apply it. But economists have difficulties to understand rules and laws because they were not trained in that. So we were creating actually something where regulation was doomed to either not apply or to make it so complicated that we cannot do it ourselves. Now, what I'm referring to is the latest, I don't know whether we can call it a scandal, but the issue that DG Competition didn't have enough experts to do the more economic approach. So they hired external advisors like RBB Economics to do the market analysis in order to prepare their competition decisions. And these are undertakings and advisories that were not only giving their advice to the European Commission, but also to the big companies that were then asking for a merger. So by making it more economic, we were creating a vehicle that actually allows more market defragmentation, in a sense, that we had almighty, basically unknown advisory undertakings that serve both sides. Is this really the right way of how to do things? I don't think so. If the European Commission concludes I do not have enough personnel to do the job myself, I always have to externalize it for a lot of money, then maybe the approach is wrong. And therefore the regulator has to return to, in that sense, an old way of regulation. There are rules, there is discretion. Discretion has to be applied, it has to be argued, and at the end it might be a court saying whether there was a transgression of discretion or not. And in that regard, legislator can then set the goals to be pursued by the supervision authorities. And supervision authorities have to be held accountable by parliaments. That is precisely their job. Maybe that sounds a bit old-fashioned, but I think the more economic approach has proven itself of not really working in practice. It has delayed procedures. It takes a lot of time until a merger decision is done. The same we have actually in state aid, in all competition law issues. So instead of having more efficiency, we have actually, we see that the opposite is happening.
I'm very tempted to say, under the guise of search for the ultimate truth, as if the ultimate truth exists in economics as social science. Moving to the DMA, and you mentioned discretion. I see it's very discretionary, and it's a good indicator, but that's the only way to do it. In the UK, we have even more discretionary toolkit, bespoke design of obligations, ad hoc for each designated undertaking. But I wanted to ask your opinion about Article 13 as a parliamentarian, because it, as EMP, because it is anti-circumvention provision, which we see in several legislative instruments. And I understand the logic behind it, why we need it. But from your legal perspective, do you think, can it be portrayed as a toolkit which would allow the enforcer to say you tick the letter of box without ticking the spirit of the letter of law, the spirit of law box? That's why you circumvented. The intent is not part of it, so it can be done unintentionally. So isn't it a Pandora box, given the discretion of the enforcer, too wide scope, or it's the only way to? It's a toxic product, but that's the only way to do it, or it's not even toxic? What is your view about this provision?
The provision is, of course, the nuclear option. It requires that a lot already has happened before we end up there. In particular, the protection of the main obligations, Article 5, Article 6, Article 7 of the DMA. So you can basically only come to the scope of Article 13 if you have already run through non-compliance procedures with regard to the main obligations. And there you must have a persistent, non-compliant economic operator in order to end up in Article 13. So from the legislator's perspective, we have it in there as some kind of, I don't know actually whether that works in English, Salvatorian clause. So in German, we call a Salvatorian clause a catch-all clause, that if something is going wrong that you haven't predicted yet, you still have something that the authorities can fall back on if necessary. I mean, we also have in some, the front clause also serves this kind of purpose, but anti-circumvention is even more. So there must have gone a lot wrong until the Article 13 must have to be used. And that also makes it that there is a lot of evidence on a company's behavior before Article 13 can be triggered. So I can see from a singular reading of Article 13 where the criticism comes from. But given what already must have happened in the past before we end up there, this discretion is definitely bound, and there is enough of evidence. And ultimately, Article 13 is something that will be judged by a court. And we see that the European Court of Justice is taking its job quite seriously on that. Also with regard to how much proof Commission must present in order to prove that its discretion wasn't transgressed, whilst it says that it's an expert and we do not replace an expert decision by a judge's decision. And there are still certain levels of proof that have to be met, irrespective of what is the content of a particular kind of decision. And that makes it, if we look at Article 13 from a practical perspective, that in practice it will be less of an issue than it might look like when you look at it solely on this particular article.
Got it. I mentioned several times that you are an academic and you've been working, and you're probably still affiliated with very influential, very symbolic for European identity institutions, universities, and you've been also working within European law for many years. So I wonder how the position, your understanding of things have changed, or your perspective, vision, optics have changed after you started engaging in policy making and in legislative process. Do you see things differently? Is it clearer or even more heterogeneous?
Yeah, this is a very good question. Let's say on a particular basis of, what is direct effect? It doesn't change really much when you're within the institutions or teaching from the outside. What is the point of the European Union? You have a general conviction that drives you as an academic, that drives me also as a politician. It also hasn't changed much. But what definitely has changed, if you see how the law is made, to look at certain rules with a different perspective, making it also more critical. I would say I had my training in Germany at the University of Heidelberg. So as a German legal academic, I'm very much of a positivist. And as a positivist, I have left Germany and went to the Netherlands, where I then ultimately got my chair at Erasmus University Rotterdam. Having already left a very positivist environment in Germany made me a bit more reflecting on, let's call it, embedding of certain laws in social contexts. So the interdisciplinary work between social sciences and legal science is outside of Germany much more valued than it was in Germany. So that changed already my academic perspective on things. Now that I see how law is made and how the processes work, I think the critical element in my academic reflection on law is growing more and more. So I see more and more that scholars like Katharina Pistor are right in a sense that they say that corporate interests infiltrate the ways of how hard law is made more and more, and that they shape certain rules in accordance. I refer then to the phenomenon of lobbying. What I see here, because you mentioned my committees, internal market, economic, monetary affairs, legal affairs, these are three of the most heavily lobbied committees in Parliament. So I see this happening here every day, and I see how they are trying to influence me as they try to influence my colleagues. I see the power asymmetry between corporate interest groups and non-governmental interest groups, and how that can lead to a asymmetry in political perception by policymakers, that you more and more believe what was told to you by 90% of the interest groups because of power asymmetries. I see how certain wordings and thoughts, narratives enter into the legal debate, and how they are translated into norms at several stages of the policymaking process. And that makes it that my own reflection, in particular of secondary law, has become indeed more critical. By that, I'm not myself becoming more critical of the idea of the European Union, of European integration as such, but I see definitely a lot of merit in these new movements, in particular, like we have it in Europe with Law and Political Economy in Europe, that is analyzing law from a more political economy perspective, and by that gives a certain vision on law that is also extra legal, but allows us maybe as academics to remedy some things that went wrong in the lawmaking process by means of legal interpretation and academic work on it.
There was this is very, I think it's very important what you have said. Yet another dimension to this academic role, which you have so eloquently and ironically mentioned at one of the recent events, was your continuous engagement in drafting research books. And I hear the echo from people who are working in academic context that it's getting more and more challenging. You've been successful in attracting major research grants, so you do it not from the perspective of not being able, like the fox and the grape, but as an objective fact, so to say. Can you reflect upon this? Is it inevitable? Should we become professional in drafting research books, or is it going too far? Is it too bureaucratic, etc.?
Yeah, there you're now going to start something, I can tell you, huh? Because, but let's say in that sense, I also must make transparent what my role is. You said, indeed, I was myself a funding drafter, but I was also an evaluator of the European Research Council for Advanced Grants. And I'm also still chairman of the faculty council of Erasmus Law Faculty, which gives a certain perspective. And as now it's also clear, I'm more on the left side of the political spectrum. Having said this, honestly, nowadays, to be an aspiring academic is quite a challenging job. I think Corona made it even worse, but already before it was extremely challenging. If you look at the workload that is put on aspiring academics, let's say from a postdoc perspective, the main source of income for universities is students, either because they are paying fees or there are some primes that are paid by the member state, by the governments for any successful bachelor student, master student, or whatever. So there's a lot that goes then into the teaching part. Then we are following a fetish of giving grades to every little sentence that we are making with the ECTS system in all this Bologna process. So everything must be comparable. For all 60 ECTS, they have to be somewhat graded at some moment of time. So every 4 months, every 4 weeks, there's a huge grading feast. But that requires a lot of man and women power in order to get it done. Whether there's any added value to it, I don't think so. If I may be even more radical, what is the whole point of grades? It is only to make the work of HR departments of big law firms easy because they have a selection criterion. But who otherwise cares about the grades except for you made it or you didn't make it? But anyway, so there's a lot in terms of teaching and grading what goes there. Then there's more and more managing tasks because there's less and less funds at universities for proper secretarial work. But there's a lot of management tasks put on postdocs. And then we end up at 20% of your working time being research. And within this 20%, you are then asked by your faculty board or by university board to indeed submit all the time funding requests. And funding requests are an own kind of discipline with an own kind of language and with a logic that you have that is very much focused on methodology because you have to show how you do it and how realistic this is. And then you must say, at the end of these 4 years, I have something that's super groundbreaking, because groundbreaking is the decision-making criterion for the evaluators in order to give you the funds. And tens of thousands of people are writing something that in the end is groundbreaking. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's definitely not the case. So there's an inflation of what is groundbreaking and what is not. But since it always has to follow the same methodology, it will also always produce the same kind of results. Since you can obviously not predict what you will find out in 5 years' time, so you have to do it on the basis of methodology, and that is already undermining, in my eyes, innovation. But what remains then from your 20%? Basically nothing. So your proper research time has to take place in the evenings or in the weekends when you normally should be a father or a mother or a friend or have your social and your private life. And that is then in bits and pieces of limited positions. So after 2 years, get your own funding. Then you can stay. Otherwise, you can move around anywhere else in Europe. This is how reality is. And this is not an environment in which any proper innovation can ever be produced. So we have national governments reducing the basic financing of universities, push single researchers into getting into competition with each other by getting then third money funding, which in itself is more of a lottery than of a success route. So therefore we come to an overall lowering of university funding. In a time where everybody is talking about R&D is the main driver for Europe's prosperity in the future. And this is for me something that is just not working. Neoliberal university has shown by putting universities into competition with each other, we come actually to a lowering of educative quality and we come to a lowering of research outcome. If we look at the amount of articles that are produced in the top journals, okay, we know also about all the problems of peer reviews, but nevertheless, the European parts in it are getting less and less and less and less, and it all has reasons. And we have to leave this logic. We have to stop forcing researchers to have so little research time and use this time also to write useless funding proposals, but rather have trust in them that they produce excellency because they have proven that already. So to basically say, you get your free time if you have proven yourself as a good researcher and do whatever you want to, because we believe it is right what you do so. I suggested, when I was still a full-time professor in Rotterdam, to the Dutch funding organizations to simply have a funding track that is based on CV and nothing else. So you just say, look, that's what I have done in the past and give me 3 years. And then on the basis of the CV, you see, okay, this person had produced interesting thoughts. I think this is well invested, whatever he's going to do with it, and then go for it. And things like that. So we have to get out of this logic if we want to get the new next innovative disruptor in Europe, that we have to change as first thing the neoliberal mindset that we have at universities. So you heard my rant, but I warned you what you do when you ask me this question, but here you got it.
That's an amazing answer. I also see how this approach, the approach which you have described, not the one which you proposed, the approach which you have described somehow develops into the grant money which European Union, the approach to the funding which European Union offers to startups, also making them somehow incubators, not very bureaucratic, but let's say somehow investing into ideas, but then non-commercializing them, not allowing them to scale up, and then the most successful stories are being cherry-picked by we know the addressees of this game. René, I wanted to ask you maybe the self-evident question. The European elections are forthcoming, and what I wanted to ask, how much can change with the outcomes of this election in digital? Is it something where we can expect rather incremental changes, or some more kind of significant bifurcation points can happen, and in which direction?
Now, what we are going to see, according to the predictions that we currently have, is that the current, what I call progressive majority of the left, Social Democrats, Greens, and the Liberals is gone. So there will be no pro-European majority in the next plenary without the Christian Democrats. And the Christian Democrats are playing a dangerous game because they like, or at least their leader likes to see himself now being in the role that currently the Liberals have. So the Liberals can always choose if they go with the left or with the right, but always there is an option for either a right-wing sort of pro-European majority or a left-wing certainly pro-European majority. That's gone. And so the renewing under this, the Liberal Party in this context always got more out of it in terms of substance than it deserved in terms of size, just because they played this role. Now, the EPP, the Christian Democratic Party, is going to be in this position in the next mandate, but that requires some deals with the devil. Since a majority without Liberals, Greens, Socialists, and Social Democrats will require working with fascists. So the discussion about what is happening, if what is going to happen in that regard, will be a very big question. And this has certainly implications on many of the discussions we had in the last mandate, if I make reference to the Green Deal. Now, that has not so much to do with digital. Yet, we can see probably also here a shift of paradigm, in a sense that the argument of let's not overregulate will become more dominant. Let markets play their forces out will become more dominant. And more ambitious attempts to give a regulation to the sector will have no prospect of success of being adopted. I don't think that is per se something to be too worried about, given that the big chunk of digital regulation is already done. We are now entering a phase of implementation, where main task of Parliament is going to hold the European Commission to account and to push the Commission forward to enforce and to actually implement the rules that we were making. And that is then a different task. It's a particular task of specialists. And if you look at those who work in detail in digital markets, because they have worked for it for years, they have a certain converging vision on how digital markets should be dealt with, irrespective of how the majority situation is. So therefore, I do believe that in terms of digital markets, the European elections will not lead to a disruption, whereas in other fields of regulation, we will most definitely see that.
And the last question which I have is to ask you to provide some recommendation to students, and your recommendations would be appreciated very much based on what you have said before.
Honestly, my main recommendation to students is make use of the freedom that you have in the times that you were studying. I still had the benefit of going for a year to Erasmus from Heidelberg to Montpellier, a step where every professional law firm person would say, okay, this is a loss of year, you need to be 21, speak 10 languages and have super grades and already a master, and they maybe already have a PhD project running, all this kind of stuff, where you get burned out because it is just unrealistic to do. So ignore these calls, make use of the freedom that the university gives, look right and left in order to see what is happening next to your discipline, get to know other people, and if this makes you 2 years older than your competitors, as an already older person, I can say, with 44, but as an already older person, I can say, ultimately, it doesn't matter. Because if you have a mature personality that comes out of university, you will make it anywhere and everywhere because you simply understand how the world works. And that is what people need.
René Repasi, thank you very much indeed for these really impactful ideas.
You're very much welcome.